Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stew again, and in this video we're going to take a look at some renders and do a director's cut audio for my Chicago to St. Louis Greenfield high-speed rail option video. We're starting off in downtown Chicago, coming away to the south from Chicago Union Station. Chicago Union Station is the presumptive origin of high-speed rail from Chicago in every direction. Chicago Union is the busiest train station outside of New York City in the United States. One thing interesting about Chicago is that its train stations are all terminals. I mean, technically there is through running at Chicago Union, but it's extremely minimal, and it's definitely not equipped to handle high-speed rail. So you combine that with the fact that Chicago is, of course, the central part of the Chicago Hub Network high-speed rail concept, and what you get is that Chicago Union is the ideal station for that activity, but then you need to figure out a way to make that work. In order to accomplish this, a scheme called Crossrail has been hatched, and that involves going up a ramp from the existing right-of-way that Amtrak uses to the south, and then crossing over, I believe it's the Chicago River, on the old St. Charles Airline route. Presumably that would replace a couple of pretty ancient looking bascule bridges that had sat in the up position for years. That maneuver would be extremely slow speed, so if this ever happens, it's probably going to take several minutes just to get out of this area that we're looking at right now. That's kind of a drawback of this plan. But right now, Amtrak train service takes 4 hours 45 minutes to get between Chicago and St. Louis, so you have quite a bit of time to work with in terms of improving things. And 5 minutes out of Chicago ultimately won't make much difference if you're trying to cut 4 hours and 45 minutes down to 3 hours, for instance. So once the train gets across the river, it's going to veer south onto Rock Island Line right-of-way, and that is owned by Metra, and as far as I know, it's all passenger rail traffic right now. So the premise here is that because of those factors, this is a rail line that you could electrify. So here we don't need to consider widening the right of way or working around freight or anything like that. We can just throw up poles and wires and then run an electric train on this, conceivably. So in this video, I did a series of shots where the train is running away from downtown Chicago, and our focus is the train in the foreground and downtown Chicago in the background, just because I wanted to provide a perspective of the city and the distance from the city from various points leading out of the city. Yeah, so here we're a little bit further out, and the idea here was that on the Rock Island line, just because of geometry and various other factors, this would probably be limited to 110 miles per hour. It is grade separated already, as are a lot of the rail lines that run through Chicago. Yeah, so here we're transitioning to Interstate 57, and my logic here was just south of this area on the Rock Island line there is a large rail yard, and also a branch of Metro Electric hooks up with that, and things get pretty tight there. So instead I elected to go down the interstate, which isn't super fast, but it's about as fast as the Rock Island line would be. And this is another shot just showing going along the freeway there on a straighter stretch through the suburbs. This is the approach to Kankakee or Kankakee. The main idea of a lot of these videos is just to show different options. So in previous videos with Chicago, I had used Millennium Station and Metro Electric. So I just wanted to show something different. Ultimately, I think if you're coming down to Kankakee or Kankakee or whatever it's called, you're probably going to use Metro Electric instead of this route. But there are a million different iterations and possibilities on how to make this work. And the main idea of the entire channel is just to get a conversation going. So sometimes I get a little bit of criticism about this route or where this thing goes or this decision, but it's really less about the specific routing and more about the concept itself. So here we are pulling into the Kankakee station, and this was the first video that I used extra props to show possibilities of development. People really liked it. Unfortunately, in subsequent videos, I kind of have ramped up the assets that I use, and it has become a lot of work. But it's just one way of showing the potential effects of the mode on the various places that it would stop. Kankakee as a city is actually pretty small, but it's on the very southern edge of the Chicago Metro, so it seemed like a good place to stop. There's also, if I remember correctly, it's also about 40 miles out of Chicago, so it's, overall it's a good place to stop, even though a lot of people don't live there. This is pulling into the Twin Cities of Bloomington Normal, about, I want to say 100 miles from Kankakee. So the premise in this video was that we were going to Greenfield from Kankakee diagonally over to Bloomington Normal. For those who aren't familiar with the term, Greenfield means you're cutting a whole new route across properties that are used for some other purpose presently. So the danger in that politically is you're going to have rural opposition, for one thing, and then two, you're going to need to acquire properties to be able to make that happen. And in this case, if you're running diagonally across an area, that means you're going to need to acquire more property than you would if you were running horizontally or vertically, since property delineations tend to be in a cardinal grid. Some people might wonder why go through all the trouble of going through the middle of town right here, and it's because the train station's actually in Normal, the city of Normal. As you can see, Normal has a kind of a compact little downtown area right next to the station, but also right next to the station is Illinois State University, and I mean right next to the station. And because of that, I think it's worth the effort of trying to reach that area as opposed to having a suburban station on the outskirts of the metro. In this case, kind of the nature of US metros also plays into that. Alright, so this is leaving the Bloomington Normal area and then hopping back into Greenfield. The general idea here of the routing on this one was Greenfield routing between the metros, run through the metros to have a downtown stop, and then back to Greenfield routing again. And my idea there was that this was the best combination of service and speed possible. because if you're circumventing the metros and putting a station, like having outlying stations, then you're going to serve fewer people, even though it would be faster. And one thing that a lot of people in other countries watching these videos don't understand about the United States is that our metro areas are inordinately large for the amount of people that live in them. And so a lot of the time going around a metro in the United States is actually slower than going through. And this was just a little preview of what it might look like getting up to 200 miles per hour there. This is coming into Springfield from the north. Springfield is the capital of Illinois. And they're working on an interesting project right now where they are altering the existing rail right-of-ways to combine, I believe it's UP and Norfolk Southern, which is funny if that's true, because the two companies are merging pretty much as we speak, and this may be redundant, which would actually be good for high-speed rail, because they're cutting this large swath through the city to fit two sets of 2 tracks separated out in a right-of-way path that honestly has room for 6 tracks in a lot of places. And so I think there's room for more tracks, and there's also room to electrify. The train station that they're building, the multimodal station that they're building right now in downtown Springfield, would not survive that, I don't think. And you'll see just in a second. There might be room for 6 tracks here. There's definitely room for 5. But I think, if you try to go to 6 tracks, there might be some demolition happening at this station. Springfield right now seems like it's largely centered around the government. Yeah, so on some of these renderings, they're a lot longer on my hard drive than they are in the video. And that's because I had come up with this grand concept of different things that I wanted to show. And then, of course, the script isn't always sufficient to be able to support that. And so things get cut out. This is a view back towards Springfield on the way out to the south. The concept I had here was we would curve off of the existing right-of-way into an abandoned right-of-way, and then curve south again onto another abandoned right-of-way, which we're not going to see. But I thought this was a cool, kind of following helicopter shot. So I used as much of it as I could, but it's just another example of the script not being sufficient to support the visuals, where mainly what you're talking about here is, hey, we're transitioning from the main right-of-way onto this abandoned right-of-way. This is coming into the St. Louis area. You can just barely see the city poking up in the background. This is close to the Cahokia Mounds complex. It's a pre-Columbian city that for some reason was mysteriously abandoned in the 15th century. You can see a mound on the left there. That's actually a dump. And kind of the ironic part of that entire setup is that the dump is about 3 times larger than the largest mound at Cahokia, which is both astounding and really, really depressing. So here, this is closer to the East St. Louis area. And the really interesting part about this setup is that this right-of-way has 3 different sets of tracks. And the right-of-way here is wide enough probably for 8. But they're separated out because they're different companies. So, you know, if that were coordinated and figured out, there'd be plenty of room for high-speed rail through here. So based on what the Illinois High-Speed Rail Commission was talking about in early days, it looked like they were wanting to go across the Mississippi River, and they were looking at doing that kind of in a zone. One crossing was a little bit further north, and it would have to come through the Gateway Arch National Park, which I thought was kind of a neat idea. But ultimately, the Illinois High-Speed Rail Commission seems to have abandoned the idea of getting over the river, which isn't the worst idea because a new rail bridge across the Mississippi would probably cost $1 billion plus by itself. So instead, they're looking at terminating in East St. Louis and hooking up with St. Louis's metro system, which extends across the border into Illinois. This shot is on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River looking at St. Louis. There are several really just engineering wonders related to rail that someone built in the 19th century. One of those is this gigantic series of ramps that leads up to this formerly double-decker bridge that goes across the river. I put a bridge next to that. I looked at this pretty closely, and there really is room for it. And you can actually get through St. Louis to the current station without much trouble. You really just need to take out a couple of derelict warehouses and then get back down to the ground. And one thing that's advantageous about this particular approach is that the ground rises from the river, so it makes it a lot easier to get back down to ground level from this bridge. Then in addition to that, you would have the complication of trying to make that all work with the existing station setup and all of the existing freight rail. I just kind of plopped down a big building there sideways, and someone else can figure out the specifics of that. And here we are coming into St. Louis. And here we are coming into the new St. Louis high-speed rail station. So in the video, I figured that it would take about 2 hours. So that's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you on that big, beautiful freeway.